Simple enough. End of video. Bye. Oh, please subscribe. Hi, I'm Marcus and I play the Shakuhachi. A few weeks ago I described how to play the basic notes on the Shakuhachi in the first register, or first octave if you like, that we call Otsu. Now let's tackle the second register or octave, which is called Kan. The notes in Kan are mostly the same, just one octave higher, and the basic notes actually are completely identical. In Otsu we have these notes, just as a quick reminder: Ro, Tsu, De, Chi, Di, and I. This is the same pitch as Ro, just one octave higher. The fingerings are completely identical between Otsu and Kan. The only difference is that the note that we call Ri in Otsu we call Hi in Kan. So that is this note. The bottom two holes are closed and hole number 5, the thumb hole, is closed. This is Ri in Otsu, and this we call Hi in Kan. I should also mention that I've been trained in KSK, so the Kokusai Shakuhachi Kenshukan. This is the lineage founded by Yokoyama Katsuya, and this is basically a Kinko school. So the note names that I'm using are Kinko note names or KSK note names. There are some differences, not for the basic notes, but for some of the notes there are some differences. So for these videos I'll stick with the Kinko names for the notes. And most schools actually use the same names or very similar names. But just to give you an idea, Tozan, for example, which is a very big Shakuhachi school as well, they use for this fingering that I just mentioned, Ri in Otsu or Hi in Kan, they call this Ha for both Kan and for Otsu. But apart from that, the basic notes have the same names in Tozan as well, so I'm thinking probably everybody can understand when I'm talking about these notes. Before we get to the actual playing, I just want to quickly explain what the physical basis of the difference between Otsu and Kan is. For playing Kan, we use a technique on the Shakuhachi which is called overblowing. This is a technique that is used on basically all wind instruments, and there are slightly different techniques depending on which instrument you're playing. For the Shakuhachi, this difference is actually very simple. To switch from Otsu to Kan, we just need to increase the speed of the airstream. So, simple enough. End of video. Bye. Oh, please subscribe. Well, okay, so lame joke, I know. Probably you're watching this video because you're trying to play Kan, and it just doesn't work quite as simple as that. And to be fair, playing Kan is something that you will have to practice throughout your Shakuhachi life. Even once you master the basics, playing Kan cleanly and with a good tone is something that requires constant practice and refinement. But how do we make the airstream faster? Well, there are two basic options. One is that we have the same opening and we just push more air through. That way, for the air to get through, it needs to get faster. The other way is that we decrease the size of the opening and we just keep the speed of the airstream constant. But for the same amount of air to pass through a more narrow gap, it has to move faster. So this way the airstream gets faster as well. It's the same as for a garden hose, for example. If you want to increase the speed of the water stream, either turn up the tap and get more water through, or hold a finger at the end of the garden hose and make the opening smaller, and that way the airstream, the water stream, comes out faster. I'm sure it works with air as well, but you use garden hoses usually for water, right? When you started playing and you were struggling to make your first tone, it's not unlikely that many of the notes that you produced were in Kan, because one of the ways to get a tone out of this thing here, which is not so easy at the start, is to just use a lot of force, to use a lot of energy, to use a lot of air. And if you use a lot of air, it's quite likely that many of the notes, as I said, are in Kan. This obviously is a very brute force solution, and it's not really recommended making this a habit, because you just use up a lot of air, which means that you cannot play long notes in the high register, which is not what we want. Also, you use up a lot of air, and you get dizzy very quickly, and you faint and you hit your head, and that's not why we play shakuhachi. So now that you're getting a bit more skill on playing the shakuhachi, we need to find out the best way to produce the notes in kan in the second octave without you having to use the brute force method. The two main aspects of shakuhachi practice are to produce a good tone color and to control the pitch. Playing kan cleanly with the correct pitch and a good tone color is actually not very easy, it requires a lot of practice. And I'm also suggesting that you use a way of playing kan that not only gets you to produce the high notes, but that also gives you a very nice tone color in kan immediately, so you don't have to learn it later on. Okay, so the way to go seems to be to make the opening smaller and to keep the airstream constant. And by that, then increasing the airspeed and then going up to kan. Quite a few teachers recommend using a technique for playing kan that is also commonly found in other flutes. For example, the Western flute uses this technique very extensively, and that is that in order to make the opening smaller or make the opening larger, you use these muscles here and you use a smiling motion or a sad motion, a frowning motion to change the size of the embouchure. So this looks a bit like this. I'm not so good with the frowning. I think I would probably smile a bit more. So this would be the way I would do it. However, there is quite a big drawback in my mind, which is that you need to engage these muscles, but in order to keep producing a nice tone color, you need to keep your lips relaxed. In particular, you need to keep your lower lip relaxed. And it's actually very difficult disassociating these two muscles, because when you tense these muscles here, it's very natural to immediately tense your lower lip as well, or to tense your lips muscles both. So at the end of the day, just for the record, this is something that you'll have to learn as well. But for your first stab at playing kan, I suggest using a different method. And that is to use your chin instead of these muscles here. The idea behind that is that rather than using these muscles to pull back, you lift up your chin or you move down your chin. And by that, you also increase or decrease the opening of your lip muscles quite naturally. So, right, this is what happens. When you open your mouth, your lips go further apart. When you bring your chin up, the lips go closer together again. The big advantage, just to reiterate this, is that you don't need to worry so much about these muscles here, but you only are concerned with the movement of your chin. And as an added benefit, practicing this is less tiring for your muscles, so you can practice longer. So that's great, right? Because you love to practice for many hours a day. The most important exercise is to switch from otsu to kan. Let's start with re. Re is a good note to do this. So this is the note where you have the holes 1 and 2 open. And this is a good note because ro in otsu, in the lower octave, is quite hard to play, in particular initially for beginners. Also, the higher notes in kan are difficult to produce. So having a note in the middle to start out with is the easiest usually for most people. And now what we're doing is that we just move the chin. So I start playing in otsu and just move the chin up and don't change anything else. So as you can see, the transition is not very clear and it's not meant to be. This is really just about practicing this chin movement. And then as a consequence, you can observe what happens, where the point is, how big the opening is when you switch to kan. Let me do this again. So for me at the moment, it just worked out so that once I switched to kan, that I stayed up there for some reason. Usually what happens is that the tone jumps up and then it jumps down again and up and down and up. So it oscillates for a while. So just keep on moving your chin up until you get a more stable kan. And again, don't engage these muscles, don't tense these muscles here. A very good aid to practicing this is to get visual feedback. So the easiest is just to practice in front of a mirror so that you can see that you're actually moving the chin and that you can also spot when you're starting to tense these muscles. So this helps keeping this relaxed and moving the chin, because it is a bit of an unnatural movement. It's not something that we're used to, and maybe you've been playing other flutes before. This is not what you usually practice. So it takes a while to get used to. Okay, so this is the first practice. Just observe what happens. Without really any intention to produce a high note. Maybe you've already discovered that one trick to playing shakuhachi, one trick to get the sound out of the instrument, is not trying to make a sound at all. The thing again is that once you're trying to make the sound, once you have this goal, this desire to make a sound, you tense up. And in particular, if it doesn't work immediately, you tense up even more, and then it doesn't work, and you tense up even more. And this is exactly the wrong way to go. The right way to go is to keep this relaxed and just see at what point you get a tone. The next step then is to make this intentional so that you can actually control where you switch to kan. So you start in otsu, and then you move to kan, and you try to control the point where you switch to kan. So this is a bit more difficult, but this obviously is what we need for playing pieces, for playing melodies, because there we cannot just see, oh yeah, well maybe it's in kan, maybe it's in otsu. We actually have to control the point where we switch to the kan. So that's the second exercise. So the first one was just going up without determining the point where you switch. The second one is to make this intentional. The third one then is even more difficult, even though it may sound quite simple. But the difficult bit then is to switch from the high octave, from the narrow opening, to the large opening, going back to otsu. So going from kan to otsu, again with the slow movement. So again, I just moved my chin. And this is what controlled the main motion. Just as a side note, I'm sure in the video you can see that I'm using these muscles as well. I just can't help it. I'm just so used to doing it. I just can't really let go of controlling it here a bit as well. So that's the third exercise, just moving the chin down, going from kan to otsu. And then we want to make this again an intentional process. The main difference here is that you don't move your chin in a steady movement, but that you're actually moving it from A to B, from the higher position to the lower position quite quickly. But you know where the high position is and you know where the low position is by practicing the slow movement first. So let's call these 4 practices. They're all very similar, of course, and it is about starting to control the chin movement. Another aspect about playing kan, or about playing the shakuhachi in general, is that for the lower notes, your embouchure is wider, is bigger than it is for higher notes. So even within the same octave, when I play Rho, my embouchure is wider than when I play E. So you can see that I'm adjusting here as well. The adjustment is not quite so big as when you switch between the octaves, but there is definitely a need for that as well. So this brings us to our 5th exercise, number 5, which is that we want to play kan in for all the notes, obviously. So the next thing that I recommend, once you get it working with re, use chi. That is also quite an easy note. Then do the same with re. and do the same with E. So you can see my E is not as stable as the other notes when I'm doing this exercise. But that's just the nature of the beast. Then we also want to do this for Tsu and for Ro, obviously. So do this with all these 4 exercises that we said before, moving the chin up slowly, moving the chin from A to B, then moving the chin down slowly and moving the chin from B to A. Okay, then next exercise, exercise number 6, play a little scale by switching between Otsu and Kan. The trick here is that for Otsu no Ro, so the lowest note that we can play, the embouchure is the biggest. Then we make it smaller for playing in Kan. Then we need to make it bigger to play Otsu no Tsu, meaning playing Tsu in the first octave. But the Tsu in the first octave is not quite as large an embouchure as we have for Ro. So basically this means big opening, smaller opening, bigger opening, but not quite as big, smaller opening, bigger opening, again, not quite as big, and so on. So you get this kind of movement, okay? That's what we practice with that. Basically, all these practices do the same thing. They train your control of your chin movement, and by that they control how much you open your embouchure or how much you close it. And these are, of course, not the only exercises or maybe even the best exercises. If you come up with anything better, let me know, leave me a comment. There are thousands of permutations in which you can do this. Maybe you find a way that suits you better, that you find easier, that lets you make progress faster. That's all great. The main thing is to practice this chin movement and to train to see where you switch between the octaves and observing yourself what you are doing when you're switching between the octaves. So now you have many exercises that you can try, many practices. Again, this will take quite a while until it gets a bit easier, until you can reliably switch between the octaves. And on some days, and this is such a day for me, the high notes are actually quite difficult to play even after years of playing. So don't worry about that. This is just something that you will have to work on constantly. But it will get easier, so there is that at least. Let me just mention 2 more aspects on this topic. One is, again, I said moving the chin is much easier, in particular at the beginning, but you can make the change just by using these muscles here. It works as well. It just needs much more control, and again, you need to distinguish between tensing these muscles but keeping this here relaxed. So that works like this. And at the end of the day, you will use a combination of both these things and even more aspects that I've not even mentioned in this video so far. Okay, that's the one thing. The other thing is that for playing Kan, many teachers, again, place a very big emphasis on engaging your stomach muscles or your belly or your hara, as many like to call it. This is just a Japanese word for this part of the body, but in the Shakuhachi world, many people like to call it the hara. It basically means controlling your diaphragm. And for producing high notes, what has to happen as well is that your airstream is quite steady. And doing that means that it helps if you push a bit from your belly, from your diaphragm, to support this so that you get a bit more stability. This basically means pulling in your belly a bit like this and pulling your diaphragm up. So it's a bit, this is the movement. Don't worry about the exact details on how to do that for the moment. It's not really critical to be able to start playing Kan. But controlling these muscles gives you a lot of control as well, because the airstream basically starts here at your diaphragm, not in your lungs, but in your diaphragm. And your control of the instrument starts here as well. So using your diaphragm is also a skill that you will develop over time. It's just that for now, don't worry about it too much. Just remember to give you a bit more stability coming from your belly, coming from your diaphragm. However, what many people don't tell you, it's not just about the diaphragm or about your belly. It's just about as much a support from your back muscles here. You know this from all the muscles. You probably learned this in school from the muscles in your upper arm, right? You have muscles on both sides, and the one contracts and the other expands, and this one contracts and that one expands. However, if you want to really control the muscle or a part of your body, both muscles will have to work in tandem. And it's just the same with your belly and your back muscles. So actually, if you have a sore back, it's really difficult to play Shakuhachi. And for exactly that reason, which is very surprising to many people, but once you've experienced that, it makes a lot of sense. So just to add that as well, that it's not just about the diaphragm control, it's about generally the control of your core. And then just to throw this in the mix as well, of course, you have muscles on your sides as well. These ones are engaged as well to keep you upright, to keep you in the right position. So it's a combination of all these muscles here that play a role, not just for playing Kan, but for playing Shakuhachi in general. But this is something, again, that will develop over time and that you can practice at a future point. So to finish off, let me just mention 2 points really briefly. One is that what makes it really difficult for some people to play is that they have something in their head that they want to produce, and if it doesn't work, they get frustrated and they tense up. And this is very problematic for Shakuhachi. If something doesn't work, try to relax. If you cannot relax, do something else for a few minutes and then come back to the instrument. That's basically the only way in which it works. The second point is that I mentioned the mirror, so observe yourself, what you are doing. An even more effective way is if you have an experienced player observing you and making suggestions on what you can do and how you can improve. This doesn't necessarily have to be a teacher. An experienced Shakuhachi player is very capable of doing that, in particular for these basic aspects of technique and for playing. But for Shakuhachi in particular, for the beginning, I say that very often, it's very advisable to get some instruction, to get a qualified teacher, because it's just a lot easier finding your way around the basics, doing it that way. And then once you master the basics, once you can play the basic notes, once you can play Otsu, once you can play Kan, just go on yourself if that's your preferred way of doing this. But in particular, the beginning is more difficult. So try to find somebody who gives you some feedback. All right, so that's all for this video. I hope you found this useful. If you have other suggestions about Kan, please leave them in the comments. Please subscribe to my channel if you find these videos useful. Please like the video. The YouTube algorithm really likes that. And again, if you find these videos useful, I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.